Have you ever noticed how the moment you finally stop overgiving, the moment you pull back ever so slightly, the moment you choose yourself instead of chasing his attention, suddenly, he starts showing up differently. Almost as if he can feel the shift. Almost as if your energy quietly whispers, "If you want me, earn me." In this opening, I want you to imagine something. Imagine a version of you who no longer anxiously waits for him to text, who no longer rearranges her world to fit into his, who no longer holds her breath hoping he finally realizes how rare you are. Instead, imagine a you who stands so firmly in your value that he can't help but sense the difference, even through silence, even through distance, even through the smallest boundary. Because, here's the truth, very few people talk about. Men don't miss you because you pull away. They miss you because they finally feel the weight of losing access to the version of you they took for granted. This video begins with a simple but powerful shift, the boundary that instantly changes the emotional equation between you and him. It's not a tactic, it's not a manipulation, it's a recalibration of your worth. The moment you implement this boundary, something happens in his mind. His comfort cracks, his curiosity rises, and his emotional muscles finally activate. You'll hear stories, psychology-backed insights, and a perspective that flips the script on attraction in a way most women never consider. Because when you stop showing up in ways that cost you your peace, he starts showing up in ways that cost him his complacency. If you're ready for him to feel your absence, to crave your presence, and to recognize your value without you having to prove it, this is where it begins. Most people think missing someone is about time or distance. But that's only the surface. The deeper truth is that missing someone is a psychological experience triggered by emotional contrast. A man doesn't miss you simply because you're not around. He misses you when the emotional rhythm he's grown accustomed to suddenly shifts in a way that awakens his awareness of your value. It's the disruption, not the disappearance, that ignites longing. Think about it. When you're constantly available, giving, initiating, explaining, reminding, and accommodating, he never has to feel the emotional ripple of your absence. Your presence becomes predictable, comforting, yes, but also invisible. The brain stops noticing what feels consistently guaranteed. Humans are wired to crave what feels meaningful, not what feels automatic. So the psychology of missing someone begins when something changes. And that change is felt more than it's seen. Maybe you stop texting first. Maybe you don't rush to respond. Maybe you stop over-explaining your feelings. Maybe you start choosing silence over justification. When that shift happens, his brain registers a pattern break. And pattern breaks awaken attention. The emotional centers of the brain, especially the ones tied to reward, anticipation, and desire, light up when something that used to feel familiar suddenly becomes uncertain. He starts wondering what you're doing, why you're quieter, why the space feels different. It's subtle but powerful. The predictability he relied on is replaced with curiosity, and curiosity is the gateway to longing. Another layer to this psychology is perceived value. When you step back in a way that feels grounded rather than reactive, he senses the difference. This kind of boundary doesn't say "I'm upset with you." It says "I'm choosing myself," and that message triggers a shift in the way he sees you. Your energy no longer feels needy or chasing, now it feels self-respecting. And that creates emotional tension inside him. Missing someone is also tied to emotional imprinting. Every meaningful interaction you've had with him, your tone, your warmth, the way you made him feel understood, gets stored in his emotional memory. When you step back, those imprints rise to the surface. They become louder because he no longer experiences them in real time. So missing you isn't him longing for the physical presence of a woman. It's him longing for the emotional experience only you created for him. And when that emotional experience is no longer instantly accessible, it becomes valuable again. This is where desire wakes up, attention returns, and he begins to feel the quiet pull of your absence in a way he can't ignore. The boundary that changes everything isn't dramatic, confrontational, or spoken with tension in your voice. It's quiet, subtle, and powerful, because it shifts the emotional dynamic without forcing anything. It's the boundary of emotional availability based on reciprocity, not giving more of your energy, attention, or emotional presence than he consistently invests in you. Most women don't realize they're over-investing. It happens in small, invisible moments, replying instantly, even when he takes hours, initiating conversations to keep the connection alive, bending your schedule so you're always free, being emotionally supportive even when he's not giving anything back, and filling every silence with effort, because you're afraid the space might make him pull away. But the truth is, the more you overextend, the less he has to rise to meet you. This boundary flips that dynamic, not by punishing him, but by aligning your availability with his actions. You're not withdrawing affection, you're not playing hard to get, you're simply no longer giving more than he consistently gives you. What makes this boundary so transformative is that it shifts the emotional responsibility back onto him. Instead of you managing the connection, he has to participate. Instead of you initiating the emotional tone, he has to contribute. Instead of you holding the relationship together, he has to step forward. Men often don't change when they're comfortable. They change when they feel the possibility of losing something meaningful, not because you threaten it, but because your energy no longer compensates for their lack of effort. And this boundary creates exactly that feeling. When you stop overgiving, his mind notices the difference immediately. Not because you've vanished, but because the flow of easy emotional access is no longer guaranteed. The dynamic becomes balanced, and with balance comes clarity. He begins to see how much of the connection was built by your effort, and how little he contributed. That realization creates internal pressure, the good kind, the kind that activates pursuit, engagement, and desire. This boundary also communicates something essential without you saying a word. You value yourself. You're available, but not at the expense of your peace. You're interested, but not at the cost of self-respect. You're loving, but not desperate. Men respond to this type of energy because it signals emotional maturity and confidence. It makes them feel they're interacting with someone who chooses them, not someone who clings to them. One of the biggest misconceptions is that boundaries push men away, but the right boundary doesn't push him away. It pulls the right version of him forward. It gives him space to show initiative, to recalibrate his effort, and to engage from a place of genuine desire instead of convenience. And here's the most important part. Once this boundary is set, you don't enforce it through words. You enforce it through consistency. Your behavior becomes the message. Over time, he begins to meet you where you are, because he senses that this is the only place connection with you can exist. This is why it changes everything. It transforms the relationship, not by forcing him to be different, but by requiring you to be aligned with your worth. Men don't value what feels instantly available. They value what requires emotional participation. This isn't because men are inherently difficult or uninterested. It's because the male mind is deeply wired to connect meaning with effort. When something requires a degree of showing up, choosing, leaning in, and proving oneself, it naturally becomes more valuable. Not because of ego, but because effort creates emotional investment. When everything is given without him having to do anything, your attention, your affection, your time, your reassurance, he doesn't build the internal emotional framework that makes connection meaningful. It's similar to how people often appreciate what they've worked for far more than what was handed to them. The investment creates attachment. The effort creates resonance. This doesn't mean you should withhold love or play games. What it means is that earned connection feels different to men than effortless access. When he has to participate in the dynamic, he becomes emotionally aware of the role he plays in it. His brain begins to tie his identity to the process of pursuing you. I show up for her. I choose her. I put effort into this. That narrative strengthens desire. One of the reasons men value what feels earned is because it appeals to their instinct for purpose. Men are driven by challenge, not difficulty, but meaning. A woman who respects herself, protects her energy, and doesn't collapse her standards for convenience, becomes someone he wants to rise for. She awakens his sense of capability. When he feels capable with you, he feels more connected to you. There's also a psychological component called effort justification. When someone invests time, energy, or emotion into something, the brain justifies that investment by increasing its perceived value. In relationships, this means the more he invests, the more important you become to him, not because of manipulation, but because of how the mind naturally works. Contrast this with situations where a woman gives everything up front. He may enjoy the comfort, but he won't attach the same significance to it, because he didn't have to show up to receive it. It becomes passive rather than intentional. And desire is never born in passivity. It's born in movement. Another reason men value what feels earned is tied to emotional contrast. When a woman shows care, warmth, and presence selectively, not withholding but intentionally, those moments feel richer and more meaningful. Because they're not constant, he doesn't take them for granted. Men appreciate the emotional depth of a woman who knows when to give and when to step back, and that ebb and flow creates a rhythm that keeps him engaged. Finally, something important happens inside a man when he invests. He becomes proud of the connection. He feels chosen because he chose you. He feels committed because he contributed. It's a loop. Effort creates emotional attachment, and emotional attachment motivates more effort. When a man feels he's earned your presence, not because you made it hard, but because you made it valuable, he cherishes it, he respects it, and most importantly, he protects it. Feminine energy that inspires pursuit isn't about acting soft, overly sweet, or pretending to be something you're not. It's about embodying a presence that naturally invites him to show up because he wants to, not because he feels pressured. This kind of energy is grounded, receptive, and confident without needing to prove anything. It communicates, I know my value and I'm open to connection, but I'm not chasing it. What makes feminine energy so magnetic is that it creates emotional contrast. When a woman is centered in herself, she isn't trying to convince a man to choose her. She isn't anxiously managing the dynamic or reading between every line. She isn't trying to earn his affection. She's simply expressing who she is and letting him decide if he's willing to rise to that level of presence. This is incredibly attractive because it removes pressure while still setting a standard. This energy shows up through subtle behaviors. It's the way you listen without rushing to fill the silence. It's the way you respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. It's the confidence to slow down instead of chasing clarity. It's the calmness that says, I'm not afraid of space because I'm secure in myself. Space, when held with confidence, becomes an invitation, not distance. Feminine energy is also about emotional authenticity. Men are drawn to women who express their feelings in a grounded, honest way without blaming or demanding. When you can say, this is how I feel, and this is what I need, with calm certainty, you create an environment where a man feels safe to step forward. He doesn't feel overwhelmed or controlled, he feels guided, and men respond strongly to that combination of softness and truth. Another part of this energy is your relationship with joy and self-fulfillment. When you're connected to your passions, your peace, your purpose, your friendships, and your emotional world, you're no longer sitting around waiting for him to validate you. That independence isn't intimidating, it's alluring. A woman who enjoys her own life becomes someone a man wants to be a part of. Most importantly, feminine energy inspires pursuit because it doesn't try to replace a man's role. It allows him to initiate, to lead at times, to express effort, and to feel appreciated for it. You're not doing everything for him, or making it impossible for him to contribute. You're creating openings where his effort matters. When you combine softness with self-respect, warmth with boundaries, openness with standards, that's when pursuit begins. Because your energy feels like an invitation to step closer, not a demand for attention. When you introduce a boundary that aligns your emotional availability with his effort, something foundational begins to shift, not only in the dynamic between you, but in the attachment patterns that have been silently shaping the relationship. This boundary doesn't just change behavior, it changes the emotional blueprint he uses to connect with you. Attachment is formed through repeated emotional experiences. If you've been over-giving, over-explaining, or over-functioning in the connection, his attachment to you becomes passive. He gets used to the idea that you'll always be there, always trying, always filling the emotional gaps. His nervous system doesn't experience any urgency, curiosity, or meaningful engagement because the relationship feels safe in a lazy way, not a loving way. When you implement this boundary, you're not withdrawing love, you're resetting the emotional rhythm. Instead of providing constant reassurance, you give him room to step into the relationship. Instead of responding instantly, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of filling every silence with effort, you allow the silence to be shared space. This immediately changes the emotional signals he receives from you. At first, his system might feel confused. He's used to relying on your consistent emotional labor, so when you stop overextending, It disrupts the familiar pattern. But this disruption is exactly what forces his attachment system to activate. He starts thinking, wondering, noticing, because for the first time he's required to participate. This participation rewires his sense of investment. He begins to experience subtle shifts. He has to reach out. He has to initiate. He has to question how he shows up. He has to contribute emotionally instead of coasting. And because he's now putting in effort, his emotional attachment deepens. His mind begins to associate closeness with intentionality rather than convenience. The connection transitions from something he receives passively to something he takes part in maintaining. This boundary also rewires your attachment. Instead of reacting from fear of losing him, fear of disappointing him, fear of being forgotten, you're responding from self-respect. You're no longer anxiously attaching by overgiving. You're securely attaching by staying grounded in your value. That shift in your energy creates stability, not chaos. What makes this boundary so powerful is that it transforms the relationship from you're chasing him emotionally to you're meeting each other equally. An equal investment creates healthy attachment. Instead of dependency, you create interdependence. Instead of imbalance, you create emotional alignment. This is how one boundary quietly restructures the entire attachment dynamic, by teaching both of you to show up in ways that create real intimacy, not one-sided effort. Desire doesn't disappear overnight. It fades slowly, usually because of subtle habits that seem harmless in the moment but accumulate into a pattern that drains attraction. These mistakes aren't about being too much or not enough. They're about unintentionally replacing the emotional polarity that creates desire with behaviors that create predictability, pressure, or emotional heaviness. Understanding these mistakes helps you avoid the silent killers of attraction that many women never realize are happening. One of the biggest mistakes is over-communication driven by insecurity. When you constantly seek reassurance, over-explain your emotions, or cling to frequent check-ins to feel safe, the dynamic shifts from connection to emotional dependence. It makes the relationship feel suffocating, not because you're too emotional, but because your communication becomes a substitute for inner stability. Desire needs space. If every emotional need goes through him, he never has the opportunity to feel his own longing. Another common mistake is reactive decision-making, where you respond impulsively to his actions instead of staying grounded. If he withdraws, you overreach. If he goes quiet, you push harder. This creates a cycle where your behavior is dictated by his inconsistency, which not only exhausts you but also signals that you're emotionally anchored to him instead of yourself. Desire weakens when a man feels he can control your emotional thermostat without doing anything. A third mistake is over-functioning, doing all the emotional, logistical, and relational labor. This might look like planning every date, initiating every conversation, managing the emotional tone, fixing conflicts instantly, or constantly checking in on his feelings. While it comes from care, it accidentally makes him passive. When he has no role to play, he becomes less engaged, and engagement is the heartbeat of desire. Another subtle desire killer is self-abandonment. When you start changing your boundaries, preferences, or lifestyle to revolve around him, you erase the individuality that made you attractive in the first place. Men are drawn to women with a sense of self, interests, passions, routines, goals. When you trade that identity for closeness, you lose the emotional polarity that fuels excitement. He doesn't want a merged life. He wants a shared life anchored in two solid individuals. A fifth mistake is emotional intensity without balance. Not your emotions themselves, but the pressure that comes from needing constant emotional processing. If every interaction becomes heavy, serious, or intense, it drains the lightness and playfulness that desire thrives on. Chemistry requires emotional depth, yes, but it also needs ease. Without that contrast, the connection begins to feel like work instead of something he wants to return to. Finally, one of the most damaging mistakes is chasing clarity from him instead of creating clarity within yourself. When every uncertainty pushes you to demand answers, labels, explanations, and definitions, you're giving him responsibility for soothing your anxiety. Desire grows from mystery, curiosity, anticipation, not interrogation. What all these mistakes have in common is that they shift you into a role of trying, proving, or managing. When you correct them, you restore balance, you restore your self-respect, and you restore the emotional polarity that allows desire to breathe again. Setting this boundary with confidence isn't about being cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. It's about aligning your behavior with the level of effort he shows so the connection becomes balanced, not one-sided. Confidence doesn't come from trying to appear strong. It comes from honoring the version of you who refuses to shrink just to keep someone close. When you set this boundary, you're not trying to control him. You're controlling your own emotional investment, so you stop giving beyond what is healthy for you. The first step is inner clarity. You must understand exactly what you want the boundary to accomplish, to stop you from overgiving, to restore emotional balance, and to allow him the space to participate instead of watching you carry everything. Confidence grows when your intentions are clear. Remind yourself, I'm not pulling away, I'm matching the energy being offered. This mindset shift removes guilt and replaces it with empowerment. Next, practice responsive rather than reactive behavior. When he texts you inconsistently, instead of panicking and replying instantly to close the emotional gap, respond at a pace that reflects your own life and your own worth. When he's distant, you don't compensate with extra effort. You simply maintain your presence without filling the space. This doesn't mean ignoring him. It means not abandoning yourself to chase him. Confidence is quiet steadiness, not loud defiance. Another key part of setting the boundary is emotional neutrality. If he pulls back and you respond with fear, the boundary becomes a reaction. If he pulls back and you stay grounded, the boundary becomes a standard. Confidence is built by learning to tolerate emotional discomfort. Maybe he takes longer to respond. Maybe he's not as expressive today. Your old self might panic and overextend. Your new self breathes, observes, and chooses a measured response. This is how your nervous system learns security. You also need to anchor your boundary in self-fulfilling actions. Fill your time with things that nourish you, your work, your goals, your hobbies, your friendships. This isn't a distraction tactic. It's reconnecting with the parts of yourself that exist outside the relationship. The more fulfilled you feel internally, the less tempted you'll be to overgive externally. Confidence comes from having a life that feels rich with or without him. Communication, if needed, should be simple and grounded. You don't lecture him about your boundary. You don't warn him. You don't say, I'm pulling back. Instead, you communicate through behavior. But if the moment ever calls for words, a confident boundary sounds like, I value connection, but I don't want to be the only one holding it together. I'm here, and I want this, but I need balance. Calm, clear, non-demanding. The final piece is consistency. A boundary that changes based on emotion isn't a boundary, it's a negotiation. Confidence grows every time you act in alignment with your worth. At first it might feel unfamiliar, but with repetition, this becomes your new emotional baseline. And when he feels this steady shift, not dramatic, not punishing, just aligned, he begins to rise to meet you. Not because you forced him, but because your confidence created the space for him to step forward. Becoming his emotional priority isn't about convincing him, chasing him, or trying to outperform other women in his life. It happens naturally when the emotional experience he has with you stands out, when your presence brings clarity, peace, depth, and connection in a way that feels both grounding and inspiring. Men don't prioritize based on pressure. They prioritize based on emotional impact. They choose what feels meaningful, consistent, and irreplaceable. The first element of becoming his emotional priority is emotional quality over emotional quantity. Many women believe that giving more affection, more attention, more communication will automatically make a man value them. But priority isn't built through volume, it's built through resonance. The moments you share need to feel intentional, not constant. When your interactions feel warm, authentic, and emotionally present, he attaches significance to them. He starts looking forward to them. He starts needing them. Another core component is embodied self-worth. A woman who knows her value doesn't need to announce it. She simply behaves in a way that reflects it through her boundaries, her standards, her steadiness, and her willingness to walk away from dynamics that leave her emotionally underfed. This creates a feeling inside him that he must show up, not because you demand it, but because he recognizes he's interacting with someone who isn't easily replaceable. Self-respect, when practiced consistently, elevates you in his emotional hierarchy without you having to fight for the position. Men also prioritize what feels emotionally safe yet inspiring. This doesn't mean being endlessly accommodating. It means being a space where he can open up without feeling judged, while also maintaining enough of your individuality that he feels energized by being around you. Emotional safety is the door. Emotional inspiration is the reason he keeps walking through it. When you bring calmness, honesty, and curiosity into your interactions, he feels seen, not managed. And feeling seen is one of the deepest emotional needs men rarely admit. Another part of becoming his priority is not over-functioning in the relationship. When you stop carrying all the emotional weight, you create room for him to invest. And when he invests, the relationship becomes something he's actively shaping, not passively enjoying. Men prioritize what they participate in. If he's contributing emotionally, initiating conversations, planning time together, checking in on you, asking about your world, he becomes more attached to the connection because he sees himself reflected in it. To become his emotional priority, you also need to maintain your own emotional ecosystem. The more grounded, fulfilled, and vibrant your life is, the more he experiences you as a woman who stands on her own, someone he wants to support, protect, and choose. Men naturally prioritize women whose lives have depth, because being part of that world feels meaningful. Ultimately, becoming his emotional priority is not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. Consistently self-respecting, consistently emotionally grounded, consistently genuine. When you hold your standards, honor your needs, and show up authentically, you create a relationship dynamic where he doesn't just want you, he values you. And when a man values a woman, she becomes the center of his emotional focus without ever asking to be. As we reach the end of this video, it's time to anchor the lessons into practical, everyday actions that create lasting impact. The key takeaway is simple. Your energy is your power. When you align your emotional availability with the effort he shows, you shift the dynamic from chasing to being chosen. Every boundary you set, every moment you pause before overgiving, and every decision you make from self-respect reinforces your value. And he notices it, even if subtly at first. One of the most powerful insights is that desire and attachment are deeply influenced by emotional contrast. When you allow yourself to be fully present yet not endlessly accessible, you create a dynamic where he has to engage to experience your energy. This is not manipulation, it's natural human psychology. Desire thrives on effort, participation, and meaningful investment. By stepping back from over-functioning and over-giving, you give him the opportunity to step forward. And when he does, the connection strengthens. Another takeaway is the importance of confidence in your boundaries. Boundaries are only as effective as the emotional conviction behind them. If you waver, guilt yourself, or over-explain, the boundary loses its power. Consistency communicates self-respect, far louder than words ever could. Confidence also comes from understanding that your worth isn't dependent on his attention or validation. When you act from this place, you not only protect your emotional energy, but you become magnetic because you signal that your life is full, balanced, and non-negotiable. We also learned that feminine energy paired with self-respect creates pursuit. Softness, warmth, and openness draw him in, but it is your groundedness, your independence, and your standards that make him stay. Men naturally pursue what feels earned and meaningful. By holding space for him to invest while maintaining your own life, you invite deeper emotional connection and elevate your position in his heart and mind. Finally, moving forward requires a mindset shift. Stop measuring your value by how much you give, and start measuring it by how aligned you are with your own standards. Desire, respect, and priority are outcomes of the energy you carry, not the effort you expend to chase him. Focus on living intentionally, nurturing yourself, and staying consistent in your boundaries. Over time, the right man will rise to meet you, and the relationship that unfolds will be balanced, fulfilling, and full of genuine connection. This isn't just theory, it's a practical framework for creating relationships where you are cherished, pursued, and emotionally prioritized, simply by honoring yourself first.